The next item on the agenda is an information item to provide us with an overview of the 6th review meeting of the Joint Convention on the Safety of Spent Fuel Management, on the safety of and the safety of radioactive waste management. This is outlined in CMD 18-M42. Joining us in attendance or by teleconference are representatives from Ontario Power Generation, the Nuclear Waste Management Organization, Atomic Energy of Canada Limited, the Canadian Nuclear Laboratories, Hydro-Quebec, and Natural Resources Canada. They will be available for questions after the CNSC staff's presentation. So let's start by confirming the participants joining us by teleconference. From OPG, Mr. Van Utegem, are you on the line? OPG? Okay, from NWMO, Ms. Ian, can you hear us?
Yes, we can, Ms. Velshi, and Mr. Paul Gruszewski is also here with us.
Thank you. And from Hydro-Quebec, Monsieur Plante, est-ce que vous êtes là?
We are here.
Ah, good. Okay, I'll turn the floor over to the CNSC staff. Mr. Jamal, the floor is yours.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Bonjour, les membres de la Commission. Mon nom est Ramzi Jamal. I am the Executive Vice President and Chief Regulatory Operations Officer at the CNSC. I'm wearing two hats today, and my hat as the head of the Canadian delegation for the 6th review meeting. And of course, as you mentioned, Madam President, the Canadian delegation consists of many contributors and our government, federal government departments, and the licensees. So without repeating the call you made with respect to the attendance, I will skip that section. However, I would like to note that Canada is one of the very few contracting parties that engage the industry and other regulatory partners in preparing the report and be part of the delegation to answer the question. So the purpose of this presentation is to provide you with an overview of the 6th review meeting of the Convention on the Safety of Spent Fuel Management and on the Safety of Radioactive Waste Management. We'll make this presentation brief and not the detailed presentation we gave at the Joint Convention, and I will be making reference to the Joint Convention instead of the full title. On slide number 2 is an overview of the presentation itself. It's self-explanatory as a slide, but we'll be discussing the highlight of the Joint Convention itself, some background, and then the appendices that you have in your presentation describe in details what each appendix will make reference to. Appendix A will provide an overview of the articles of the Joint Convention, and Appendix B has the full Canada's presentation for the 6th review meeting. The reason we're going to talk to you about the articles of the Joint Convention because the Convention itself is legally binding instrument, and even though it's legally binding, it's incentive. So in other words, if there are no non-compliance or no conformity, the contracting party will not be referred to the, for example, to the Security Council or anything of that sort. So it is an incentive with respect to the compliance. What is the objective of the Joint Convention? Is to maintain a high level of safety in spent fuel management and safety in radioactive waste management. The intent is to ensure and assure the public that there is a contracting parties who are assuring that the public and the environment will be protected from harmful effect of ionizing radiation during all stages of the spent fuel and radioactive waste management. And the intent is to mitigate and prevent accidents with, associated with radiological consequences should they occur during, again, any stage of the spent fuel or radioactive waste management cycle. The frequency of the review meetings is once every 3 years, and this commitment is legally binding in accordance with the articles of the Convention. The discussions in the Convention is confidential discussion. It is not open for the public. The reason being is the contracting parties wish to remain that discussion confidential because there will be a frank discussion and an open discussion challenging the contracting parties in order to improve safety at the global level. Why is the Convention of importance to Canada? Being contracting parties provide significant benefits for Canada. It allows us to perform a peer review and a self-assessment against the guidance and the requirements of the convention. And then the frequency is on a 3-year basis. It also provides us with an international peer review process in an open forum within the rules of the Joint Convention, and allows regulators, government officials, and industry to have a discussion on the best practices or best available technology and best applied practices to include regulatory OPEX and industry OPEX. It is very important to ensure that the national arrangements for spent fuel radioactive waste management conform to international agreements. The Joint Convention, again, is a legally binding requirement, and Canada was one of the first countries to ratify the convention. As we move forward, the report and the convention itself and the report and our national report provides a good reference through the development of the national report on what is happening in each and every contracting party and in specific for Canada. And we take pride as Canada, as CNSC, that we publish on our website, which is publicly accessible, our national report, the questions we receive and the answers we provide to the other contracting parties. And it's not very common. So our participation at joint review, it takes a lot of resources. As you can see, my colleagues right across me and behind me are just a small representation of the contribution to the national report. So Canada, as I mentioned, was the first contracting party to ratify the Joint Convention, and it came into force in June 18th of 2001. Since the coming in force of the convention, Canada has participated in all of the review meetings. If we missed one review meeting, if we did not submit a national report, we'll be in contravention of the articles. So to date, we are in full compliance, and the 6th review meeting was held on May 21st to June 2nd, 2018. It was a 2-week-long period. As I mentioned before, I will briefly discuss the obligations of the Joint Convention. So the articles of the Joint Convention obligates every contracting party to submit a national report, and the national report has guidelines that we must follow as contracting parties. We always break grounds in our national report that for the Joint Convention and even for the Convention of Nuclear Safety, we included in our report the IRS missions or follow-up missions and the closure of the suggestions, recommendations arising from the services provided by the IAEA. We actively participate in the international peer review process. We provide responses to questions, and we are obligated to provide responses in quality manner. It's not just yes or no. We have to provide facts associated with our responses. Our attendance every 3 years has been regular, and our purpose to be present is to present the national report. And the national report is being presented not just by myself, by every contributing element of the Canadian delegation. NRCan, AECL, OPG, and the industry itself make the presentation. So each contracting party will be fitted into a country group, and the country group will have an in-depth discussion of the report of contracting party. Next slide. So a significant amount of resources has gone into the report, and I will elaborate on each step of the preparation of the report as we go forward in the slides. So we start with the submission of the national report. We draft the report from the CNSC perspective. Contributors review the reports. We have multiple meetings in order to come up with the final version. And it takes us approximately 9 months or so to have the report finalized. So the report highlights the inventory, talks about our regulatory process, talks about Canadian policies, and it talks about the structure, and the way forward of the waste management in Canada. So the organization contributed to the Canada's sixth national report is, of course, the CNSC, Atomic Energy of Canada Limited, Bruce Power, Chemical, Hydro-Québec, Nordion, Natural Resource Canada, Nuclear Waste Management Organization, NB Power or New Brunswick Power, and Ontario Power Generation, which is OPG. As part of our participation in the Joint Convention, we reviewed 25 national reports. Canada reviews national reports of other contracting parties that are of interest to Canada. And when I speak of interest to Canada, could be technical, could be policy, in order for us to learn from peer review process. For example, many contracting parties are ahead of us in the deep geological repositories, such as Finland, with respect to low-level and intermediate-level waste. So we do ask them questions with respect to how they are managing and what's for us to extract the best practice and regulatory OPEX or operational OPEX. We are fitted, in order to manage the convention is structured into country groups, and each country group has a proper distribution, both geographical and based on the national program. So if there is a large program, then they try to distribute the contracting parties to include large operations of nuclear programs and small operators to provide diversity in the discussion and the capacity of contracting parties to learn from each other. So in our country group was Georgia, Ghana, Lithuania, Morocco, the Netherlands, the Republic of Korea, and Uruguay. And I'm not going to read what's on the slide, but Canada reviewed reports of other contracting parties. In total, Canada posed 97 written questions to other contracting parties. And in our country group discussion, there were contracting parties who were interested in Canada's report, even though they are not members of the country group. They did participate and they asked questions. And I will provide the names of them shortly. Our participation of the peer review process was that 17 contracting parties posed 86 questions to Canada. The questions came from China, Euratom, Finland, France, Germany, to name a few, Russian Federation, Sweden, UK, and USA. And as I mentioned, all of the questions and answers provided and our presentations are posted on the CNSC public website. We take pride of our review of the national reports of other contracting parties because we commit to open discussion and at times very challenging because we want to lead by example. The intent of the convention is not to pat each contracting party on the back, but to challenge the contracting parties where we see or foresee deficiency in the application of nuclear safety at the global level. On this slide, I'd like to share with you some of the topics that there were questions, or the topics of the questions that were posed to Canada by the 17 contracting parties. A lot of interest in our long-term management of spent fuel cycle. Questions were asked of us on the interim storage of spent fuel and design life of structure/containers, the waste minimization technique, waste classification and clearance of radioactive material, CNSC public hearing process, the community involvement and indigenous engagement, and the decommissioning end states of the facilities, and import-export of seal sources and orphaned, disused seal sources. Canada has a full cycle of nuclear fuel cycle and a full cycle regulator and full cycle oversight by other government departments. That's why there is an interest you see from the rock all the way to the, from cradle to grave with respect to the nuclear fuel cycle. Next slide, please. So I would like to take an opportunity to introduce who's with us today. I have with me the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission delegation, Corinne Glenn, Heidi Tedros, Julie Mackey, Phil Webster, he is our nuclear counselor in Vienna, he's permanently in Vienna, Jocelyn Trong, Tiffany Lowe, Mr. Kent is not present, but Anna Mazur represents our legal section unit, and this will be the second time in Canadian history. Anna? Oh, here's Anna. This is the second convention where we engage with our legal section unit to be present, and they are extremely helpful in order to provide us with interpretation, and especially to provide the head of delegation proper advice on the articles of the convention. We've got with us from Natural Resources Canada, Mr. Dave McCauley and Catherine Betke. She's not here. On the line is Ontario Power Generation. Even though Liz Morton is not present, but Liz was part of the delegation. Mr. Dave Van Oetken is online, and part of the delegation from Ovichi was Shaheen Sheikh, and I don't think she is here. On the NWMO, it was Mr. Ben Fadel Marez, Paul Grursky, and Mihaela Ion. She's online, and I believe Paul is online too. From ACL, on a avec nous Maud-Émilie Paget, et puis Paul McClelland, and Canadian Nuclear Laboratory Jérôme Beignet, et puis Hydro-Québec Steve Plante. It's important to note that the Canadian delegation was not just attendees. We've got officers who were elected to be part of the officers of the Joint Convention, and Canada should take pride of the competency of our colleagues who sat as officers on the Joint Convention. So in total, 9 CNSC staff and 12 members from the other organizations that I mentioned. Next slide. So what do we do for 2 weeks? For the first week, I usually attend, and then Ms. Tedros took on the head of delegation for the second week. The first week that's when the discussion takes place pertaining to the national reports. So on the first week, myself and my colleagues delivered the Canada's presentation, and we answered questions. We posed follow-up questions at the peer review sessions of the contracting parties. And then we helped facilitate as review officers who were elected to be part of the officers of the convention. And we participated actively in the peer review process. It's very important to note that as the convention takes place, it is not just one meeting. Think of it as a big conference where you have parallel sessions that are taking place. So as part of the head of delegation, we strategically look at contracting parties or country group that is of interest to Canada, and then we disperse ourselves in order to obtain the information. The key point to know as commission members is if I am attending a country group in which Canada is not a member of that country group, we cannot ask the questions till the contracting parties of that country group finishes their questions, and the chairman will allow other contracting parties to ask questions. So it goes on a priority basis. A member of a country group or a contracting party of a country group asks the question first, if there is time, and then other contracting parties, the floor will be open for other contracting parties. So in our presentation, there was a huge interest from Switzerland, US, and I'm forgetting one more contracting party who were present, and they did ask us quite a few questions. The presentation itself is around 1.5 hours. We took questions for almost 1.5 hours. And then there was an outcome out of the 6th review, and I will talk about the outcome of the 6th review. So we made the country presentations, we provided answers and questions. The outcome of the country group, or on the record, a report called a rapporteur's report, and that becomes the official outcome of the country group, and that rapporteur's report is transformed over to the plenary session to reflect the discussion in the country group. It's very important to note for the public and for the individuals who are not engaged in the country group discussions, if an item is closed or if an item is open, is done by consensus by all contracting parties. So it's not an opinion of one contracting party, it's not an opinion of one individual. So all of the country group members, all of the contracting parties who are a member of the country group will have to reach consensus with respect to the outcome and the rapporteur's report. So it's quite an extensive discussion, and if there is one disagreement, then the chairman will have to navigate through in order to provide a final version of the report. So in our country report, the 8, which included, as I mentioned, Lithuania, Uruguay, Republic of Korea, Uzbekistan, Ghana, Morocco, Niger, Netherlands, and Georgia. And US, Romania, and Switzerland attended our country group due to their interest with what Canada is proposing and presenting. As I mentioned, the rapporteur's summary report is the record arising from the country group. So we were asked, I'm going to go a little bit to describe the questions we received. There is an interest on the continuous enhancement of safety requirements as established by the CNSC and legislated financial guarantee requirements on operators. The licensing process as it relates to the licensee's demonstration of the safety case and opportunities for public involvement in the decision-making process. That is a big one with respect to the public engagement and the transparency of the CNSC. I would unequivocally state the whole contracting parties group is very interested on how we are able to manage the public interest in our regulatory process and how we engage them. And the mechanism for public participation in the CNSC annual reporting on regulatory oversight. I will come back to item number 3 on this slide with respect to the CNSC annual reporting and the public engagement outside the licensing process. There is significant interest in the CNSC licensing renewal process, and in specific, the compliance verification of existing licensees and the establishment of the license condition handbook and the compliance verification. Many contracting parties are trying to copy what we've done in order to provide clarity. Item number 5 on this slide is the roles and responsibility of the regulatory body, which includes the technical support organizations and other technical experts supporting the regulatory body. We are unique in Canada that TSO, Technical Support Organization, is integral to the CNSC. And Mr. Peter Elder, who is the Chief Science Officer, is the head of the TSO. And in Canada and at the CNSC, our TSO is integral to the CNSC itself. So it's not an outside organization providing us with a service, it's integral to the CNSC. Item number 6, there was an interest on how Canada has established the independence of the regulator and continues to do so. Number 7 is the challenge that everybody is facing, in specific on ensuring knowledge management for safety of radioactive waste and spent fuel management, especially when many of the facilities are moving towards decommissioning that might take place in decades from now or 10 years from now. The international interest, how do you maintain knowledge management with respect to the management of waste fuel and having the adequate knowledge for workers to carry on their activity safely. As I mentioned before, the review meetings are a continuation of previous review meetings. So the 5th review was a continuation of the 4th review, the 6th review was a continuation of the 5th review. In every review meeting, if there are challenges identified for the contracting parties, those challenges will be legally put on Canada in order to address. At the 6th review meeting, the challenges were reviewed, evaluated by the contracting parties, and like I mentioned, the closure was obtained by consensus. So we were able to obtain consensus to close the following challenges we had from the previous review: industry access to suitable skills and resources to support a change in focus from operations to decommissioning. the human resources capability to ensure that there is adequate regulatory oversight from our perspective as there is a shift from operations to decommissioning. And at the time, Canada was facing for the first of a kind an implementation of government-owned contractor-operated management model for radioactive waste and management facility and the completion of the procurement process. So as contracting party, we provided the factual evidence associated with our request for closure. It was reviewed, it was debated, and the country group agreed that these challenges are closed. As part of the fifth review challenges, we have several who remains open. The contracting parties and the country group felt that there is more work is required in order to have a full closure of the challenges. One of them is defining an acceptable site in a willing host community for spent fuel repository. That challenge will remain open. Develop an integrated strategy for non-OPG low and intermediate level waste disposal. And continued accelerated decommissioning and remediation of ACL site. Those challenges will remain open until the seventh review. It's important to note that no new challenges were identified to us, to the Canada as a contracting parties, based on our national report or the discussion at the country group. The outcome of the sixth review meeting, Canada received one good practice identified in the review meeting. I would like to highlight the fact that a good practice is, if you want to think of it as the gold medal or diamond medal, if there's such thing, they don't grant us very, very frequently. So I would like to read on the record what is the definition of a good practice. A good practice is defined as a new or revised practice, policy or program that makes a significant contribution to the safety of radioactive waste and spent fuel management. A good practice is one that has been tried and proven by at least one contracting party, but has not been widely implemented by other contracting parties and is applicable to other contracting parties with similar programs. So that's the strict definition of good practice. So we got one good practice out of the six, and that was given to us in consensus. So the interest is the CNSC Annual Regulatory Oversight Report at Commission Proceedings, which provide opportunities for public involvement through interventions and the availability of the CNSC participant funding program independently from any licensing process. So our RORs are been looked at as outside the licensing process as a good practice for other contracting parties to follow. And in addition to it is the participant funding program that gives an opportunity to interested parties to engage. As I said, I wear multiple hats. One of them still is the president of the Convention on Nuclear Safety. While I was president of the Convention on Nuclear Safety, there was a huge debate between contracting parties of, I mentioned the gold medal or diamond medal, good practice, but contracting parties wanted to go back to the government and say why we're here and what can we take back. So as president of the Convention of Nuclear Safety, I created an area of good performance. So in other words, if a contracting party has made good improvements in their regulatory program or in their policy or in the governmental structure, they should be going back with an indication from the peer review process that something good has been improved between the review meetings. So we got areas of good performance on openness and transparency through public commission hearings and opportunity of public participation throughout the licensing period. The CNSC Independent Environmental Monitoring Program received international kudos that we as a regulator independent of industry, we carry out our own independent environmental monitoring program. And then the national NWMO integrating indigenous knowledge with science in the site selection process for the deep geological repository for spent fuel. And that's key for many contracting parties to learn from. So this new category now will stay with all of the conventions, mainly pertaining to safety and received good success, so that the contracting parties are encouraged to continue their improvements. The other outcomes of the sixth review, any enhancement to the process itself, because it's a convention and legally binding process, has to be done in a formal environment. So Canada always contributes to enhance the process of the convention itself, and it has to be done, again, by consensus via a mechanism called open-ended work group, by which contracting parties come with proposals. The proposals are debated, either accepted by consensus or rejected. I would be amiss not to tell you that geographical pressures are brought into the open-ended work group. Political interference are brought into the open-ended work group. And this is one of the very few places where diplomats show up in order to present the flex their government muscles or interfere or add substance. But I'll refrain from my comments on that one. So we made our proposals in order to enhance the joint convention. The first proposal was to remove the requirements for the contracting parties to submit one paper copy of their national report to the Secretariat. We do not need paper anymore, so we are beyond that era. So the consensus was obtained for such electronic submission, because the paper copy nobody reads, it's stored somewhere, nobody knows where. With respect to the second proposal, at the Convention of Nuclear Safety, I was able to convince the contracting parties with a proposal to video conference the national report of a contracting party who does not have the financial capability to attend in person, or not able to get a visa, or they have challenges in participating in person. So that proposal has been accepted. It is at its infancy. The IEA, which is the Secretariat, will have to establish a mechanism in place and a tool in order to allow contracting parties to make presentation by video conferencing. And we'll stay tuned for how that's going to take place. In addition to our attendance, we carry out many bilateral meetings on the margins of the Joint Convention, one-on-one. The members of the Canadian delegation that they have special interest from our industry colleagues, from our government colleagues, will meet with contracting parties in order to exchange information. So we always talk about how we are always in a learning mode with respect to international best practices for waste management and decommissioning, and opportunities for future regulatory cooperation. And we always talk about the interest with respect to the election of the officer for the 8th review on the Convention Nuclear Safety Review meeting. And that is my personal interest. We make sure that the convention, or CNS, that the political arena is ready with respect to the election of the officer for the 8th review of the Convention Nuclear Safety. Those are not the only topics, but those were the major topics that we've put in place for the bilateral discussions. Overall conclusions. The Joint Convention is a valuable peer review process. The Convention is ratified by the Government of Canada. The Government of Canada assigned the CNSC to be the lead for this Convention. So we are obligated by law for us to engage and perform adequately under the articles of the Convention. That's the legal element. With respect to the regulatory OPEX, technical information, and learning from each other in a sharing good practices, operational experience, and discuss of emerging issues is phenomenal. And identifying challenges and having a follow-up process for closure of challenges is of importance to all of us and to the contracting parties to ensure that there is adequate global nuclear safety regime. So I'm proud to say that our delegation was a strong participant at the 6th review. We've met the obligations of the Joint Convention, and that is in the report of the President of the Convention. We've contributed significantly to the review process. We've contributed significantly to the improvements of the Convention. and will continue to demonstrate leadership in nuclear safety, regulatory excellence, openness, and transparency. And staff, we are available to answer any questions you may have. Oh, next steps. Too anxious to stop. It's lunchtime. Prepare for the 7th review meeting in 2021. We will assemble the new team in the spring of 2019 to start drafting the CANA's report. We engaged in work to propose enhancement to the Joint Convention, and then we'll keep an eye on the improvements we've requested that will be executed, and we'll manage CANA's effort to address challenges identified at the 6th review meeting. So we'll continue to be a leader in the safety of spent fuel management and radioactive waste management. So thank you for your attention. That's the end of our presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Jamal, for an excellent presentation, and kudos to the team for a very successful meeting.